Parents disowned me for not supporting my sister's lifestyle. She's family, you owe her, they said. I said okay and cut them off. Now they're desperate because... I still remember the exact moment my mother looked me in the eyes and said, "If you won't help your sister, then you have no place in this family." She said it so casually, like she was telling me dinner was at 6. My father didn't even look up from his phone as he muttered, "Maybe it's better this way." And my sister? Oh, she was smiling. Arms crossed, head tilted, practically glowing with satisfaction. I could see it in her eyes. She had been waiting for this moment. I stood there, staring at the three of them, half expecting someone to crack and say it was all a joke. That they didn't really mean it. But the silence stretched on. Finally, I let out a short laugh. "Wow," I said, grabbing my jacket off the chair. "Guess I'll save you the trouble." And I walked out the door. No one stopped me. No one called after me. No one even pretended to care. And that should have hurt. Maybe a long time ago, it would have. But I had spent years being the other child, the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never asked for anything but was expected to give everything. And my sister? She was the black hole my parents threw money into, always with the same excuse: she's family. You owe her. For years I played along. Loaning her money when she fell on hard times, covering her rent when she blew her paycheck on shopping sprees, bailing her out when she called me crying about an emergency that always turned out to be self-inflicted. And my parents? They never thanked me. Never told her to get her act together. They just expected it. Until I finally said no. That's when I became the villain. That's when they disowned me. And for a while I let them. I walked away and built a life without them. I was finally free. But now they were the ones desperate for help. And I was the only person left who could save them. Too bad for them. I had been waiting for this moment, too. For the first few months after they cut me off, my life got better. I wasn't drowning in last-minute calls from my sister, begging me to cover her rent because she forgot about the due date. My bank account actually had savings for the first time in years. I didn't have to put up with my parents' guilt trips or their constant lectures about family loyalty, which, in their eyes, only worked one way. I finally had peace. And I fully expected that to be the end of it. They had made their choice. I had made mine. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. It had been almost 2 years since I had heard from any of them. I recognized the number instantly. It was my mother. I let it ring. She called again. Then again. By the 4th call, I figured something was seriously wrong. My mother never reached out unless she needed something. And if she was this persistent, it wasn't just a casual, "How have you been?" kind of call. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked up. "Hello?" For a second, there was silence. Then I heard my mother's voice, shaky and hesitant. "Stephen, it's your mother." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Yeah, I know." A pause. "How have you been?" I almost laughed. She didn't care. She had never cared. So why the fake concern now? "I'm fine," I said flatly. "What do you want?" She hesitated. "It's about your sister." Of course it was. I should have hung up right then and there. But something in her voice sounded different. Desperate. "What about her?" My mother exhaled sharply, as if she had been holding her breath. "It's bad, Stephen." That got my attention. My sister had spent her whole life bouncing from one bad decision to another, but bad for her usually meant something stupid like maxing out a credit card or getting fired for showing up late too many times. This sounded different. "How bad?" I asked. Then, for the first time in my life, I heard my mother start crying. She took everything." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "She drained us, Stephen," my mother choked out. "The house, the savings, she. Her voice cracked. My stomach twisted. Because in that moment I knew. My sister had finally done to them what she had been doing to me for years. And now? They had nothing left. I waited for my mother to finish sobbing. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "So why are you calling me?" Silence. Then, in the smallest, most pathetic voice I had ever heard from her, my mother whispered, "We need your help." I almost dropped my phone laughing. I couldn't help it. After years of being treated like a walking ATM, after being told I wasn't real family, because I refused to bankroll my sister's reckless spending, my mother was now begging for help? "Stephen?" My mother's voice was shaky. I took a deep breath, trying to control my amusement. "So, let me get this straight. After all these years of telling me I owe her, after cutting me out of your lives because I wouldn't play along, now you need my help?" I could practically hear her squirming on the other end of the line. We didn't realize things were getting this bad." "Really?" I said, leaning against the counter. "Because I did. I told you this would happen. I warned you, Mom. I told you Amanda was going to drain you dry. And what did you say?" She sniffled. "No, let me remind you," I interrupted. "You said she's family, Stephen. You owe her." Silence. Then she tried a different tactic. "Stephen, please. You're our son." "Oh, so now I'm your son again?" I let out a cold chuckle. "Because the last time I checked, I had no place in this family." "Stephen." I sighed and rubbed my temples. "Tell me everything. How bad is it?" It took her a few seconds to gather herself, but then the floodgates opened. Apparently, Amanda had gone all in on her usual habits, quitting jobs, racking up credit card debt, and guilt-tripping my parents into covering for her. Only this time, it wasn't just her finances at stake. She convinced them to co-sign loans for her. Multiple loans. Big ones. She borrowed money from them under the guise of investing in herself. At first, she said it was for classes to help her build a career, which was funny, because she never worked more than a few months at a time. Then it was for a business idea that never materialized. And then, the worst part, she took out a second mortgage on their house. Or rather, she convinced them to take one out for her. She said she'd pay it back. My mother whimpered. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "And you believed her?" "We didn't think she'd." "Mom. She's been using people her entire life." "You knew this." My father finally spoke up in the background, his voice gruff and bitter. "She abandoned us, Stephen. The moment we ran out of money, she disappeared. Won't return our calls, won't answer the door." I could hear the raw anger in his tone, but I felt nothing for him. He had defended Amanda at every turn. He had enabled this. And now, they were paying for it. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "that Amanda took all your money, left you drowning in debt, and cut you off the second you weren't useful anymore?" "Yes," my mother admitted. "Huh. Funny how that works." My father cleared his throat. "Look, Stephen, we need help. We're—" He hesitated, then muttered the next part like it physically hurt him to say it. "We're going to lose the house if we don't come up with the money." I didn't respond. I wanted them to feel the weight of their words. "We know we made mistakes," my mother whispered. "We should have listened to you. But we're your parents. Please, Stephen. We don't have anyone else." I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. They were right about one thing. They didn't have anyone else. Because the only person dumb enough to keep bailing them out had been me. And this time? I wasn't so sure I wanted to. I let the silence drag on. It was delicious. For years I had been the one groveling for their approval, the one guilt-tripped into sacrificing my own stability for Amanda's reckless lifestyle. And now? They were the ones groveling. I could hear my mother's shaky breathing on the other end, my father shifting uncomfortably in the background. They were waiting. Desperate. And I was going to let them wait. Finally I sighed. "So let me get this straight. You disowned me because I wouldn't give Amanda money. Now Amanda's gone, and suddenly I'm family again? That's not fair," my mother whispered. I laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Not fair? Oh, now you care about fairness?" "Stephen, please," my father cut in, his voice gruff. "This isn't the time for—" "No, see, I think it is the time," I said, standing up and pacing the kitchen. "Because when I needed you, You didn't just ignore me, you cut me off. You chose Amanda over me. Silence. I ran a hand through my hair and shook my head. And now what? You expect me to swoop in and save you? Just because we share DNA? You're making it sound. I cut her off. That's exactly what you did to me. Another silence. But this one was different. This wasn't just uncomfortable. This was realization. For the first time, they actually had to sit with the weight of their choices. I heard my mother sniffle. My father exhaled sharply, like he was trying to hold back his frustration. He had spent so long pretending he was the one in control. But now, he wasn't the one with the power anymore. I was. And it was time I used it. I sighed. All right. Here's what we're going to do. My mother gasped. Oh, thank you, Stephen, No. I cut her off coldly. I didn't say I was helping you. I said I was going to tell you what happens next. She hesitated. What do you mean? I walked over to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water, taking my sweet time before responding. You let Amanda use you. You gave her everything, despite every warning, despite every red flag. And now you have nothing. No savings. No house. No daughter to come save you. I took a sip of water. You only have me. Another silence. And then I twisted the knife. And I want you to sit with that. My father, always the stubborn one, finally snapped. So what, you're just going to leave us out in the cold? Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I shot back. My mother started crying again, muttering something about not knowing what else to do. I could have ended it there. I could have just let them suffer, let them watch their lives collapse the same way they had watched mine. But I wasn't done yet. No, if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. So I let my voice soften. Just a little. Just enough. I'll think about it. I could hear my mother's breath hitch. My father didn't speak, but I could imagine his grip tightening on the phone. Hope. That was the key. I was going to let them believe I might save them. And then? I was going to pull the rug out from under them. For the next few days I let them stew. I didn't call. I didn't text. I made them wait. And predictably, their messages started flooding in. At first they were polite. My mother sent long, rambling texts about how they loved me, how family should stick together, how she knew we could move past this. My father, ever the prideful one, kept it brief, just a single. Let's talk. Then came the guilt trips. Mom, we raised you, Stephen. Do we really mean nothing to you? Dad, you'll regret turning your back on your family? We won't be here forever. Classic. When that didn't work, they switched to begging. Mom, please, Stephen. We'll do anything. Just help us keep the house. Dad, I know we made mistakes, but we're out of options. We need you. There it is. That single word, need, was what I had been waiting for. They had finally admitted the truth. For years I had been nothing more than a resource to them. Not a son. Not family. Just someone to use whenever Amanda drained them dry. And now? Now they were desperate. It was time to strike. I called my mother first. She picked up immediately, as if she had been sitting by the phone waiting. Stephen? Her voice was breathless with hope. I let a long pause stretch between us. Then I sighed. I've been thinking. She gasped. Oh, thank you, Stephen. Not so fast. My voice was calm, controlled. I had the power now. I need details. Details? Yes. I want everything. The loans. The mortgage. The debt. The exact number you need to keep the house. There was a pause, as if she hadn't expected me to be so blunt. Then she cleared her throat. Well, the mortgage is 3 months behind. The second loan Amanda took out. The one you co-signed. I interrupted. Yes, she admitted. That one is $75,000. I nearly whistled. That was worse than I expected. And that's not counting the credit cards, she added hesitantly. I exhaled slowly. So what you're saying is, you're completely screwed? Yes, she whispered. Good. I let out another sigh, making it sound like I was really considering helping. All right, I said finally. Here's what we're going to do. I could feel her holding her breath. I'll come over tomorrow. We'll sit down, go through everything, and figure out a plan. Oh, Stephen, she gushed. I knew you wouldn't abandon us. Don't get ahead of yourself. I cut in. This isn't a yes. It's a conversation. Of course, she said quickly. But I could tell, she thought she had won. She had no idea what was coming next. The next day, I pulled up to my parents' house, the same house they had once thrown me out of without hesitation. It looked different now. The lawn was overgrown, the paint peeling. The pride they once had in their home? Gone. When my mother opened the door, she looked exhausted. Stephen, she breathed, like she had just been saved. Come in. I stepped inside. My father sat at the dining table, arms crossed, trying to look composed. But I could see it, the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his fingers. He hated this. Hated needing me. Good. I sat down across from them and placed my phone on the table. Let's go over the numbers. My mother rushed to grab a stack of papers. It's all here, she said, flipping through them. The mortgage, the credit cards. I held up a hand. Before we start, I said slowly, I just have one question. They both looked at me. I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head. Would you have done this for me? Silence. My father looked away. My mother's face fell. I nodded. That's what I thought. Now? It was time to end this. The silence stretched between us. My mother swallowed hard. Stephen, that's not fair. I held up a hand. No. Answer the question. She opened her mouth, then closed it. My father still wouldn't look at me. I exhaled, shaking my head. You wouldn't have. You didn't when I needed you. Stephen, please, my mother whispered. We made mistakes, but... I tapped my fingers on the table. You're asking me to fix a problem you created. To save a house you risked for Amanda. I let the weight of my words settle before delivering the final blow. I'm not going to. My mother gasped. My father's head snapped up. You what? I stood. You heard me. My mother reached for my arm. Stephen, please. I pulled away. You chose Amanda over me. Now you can live with that choice. And with that I turned and walked out, leaving them exactly where they left me years ago. Alone. I expected the yelling to start the second I reached the door. Instead? Silence. I could feel my mother's stunned stare burning into my back. My father, always the prideful one, was too furious to speak. Good. I grabbed the door handle, but just as I was about to leave, my mother's voice cracked behind me. Stephen, we'll lose everything. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her out of the corner of my eye. Tears welled up in her face. My father sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. For years, they had dismissed me. Used me. Tossed me aside when I was no longer convenient. And now? Now they were begging. I let out a slow breath, pretending to consider it. Maybe you should call Amanda, I said flatly. My mother winced like I had slapped her. She's gone, my father muttered barely above a whisper. She won't even answer the phone. I turned fully now, crossing my arms. Ah, I see. So she only cared about you when you had money. I tilted my head mockingly. Sound familiar? My father's fists tightened. My mother wiped her tears, shaking her head. We didn't know. Yes, you did. My voice was sharp. You just didn't care, until it hurt you. They had no argument for that. I glanced around the house, once a symbol of their security, now just another dead-ridden mess. You let her ruin you, I continued. The same way she tried to ruin me. I turned back toward the door. But I got out. I pulled it open, letting the cold air from outside sweep in. And so will you. Figure it out. And this time? No one stopped me. I walked out of that house and never looked back. At least, that's what I told myself. But the second I got into my car, I sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring out at the street. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt done. For the first time in my life, I had all the power. My parents had spent years holding family over my head like a leash, demanding my loyalty while giving me none in return. And now they had nothing left to leverage. I was free. Still, the weight of it all sat heavy on my chest. They were my parents. No matter how cruel, how selfish, how utterly blind they had been, some small, buried part of me had wanted them to change. To realize their mistakes. To apologize. But they wouldn't. They never would. Because people like them? They don't change. They don't have some grand epiphany and realize the pain they've caused. They only feel sorry when it affects them. And that was exactly what was happening now. My phone buzzed. I already knew who it was. Mom, Stephen. We need to talk. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Talk? Now she wanted to talk? After years of ignoring every plea, every boundary, every warning I had given them? I watched the 3 little dots appear, then disappear, as if she couldn't find the right words. Then another message popped up. Mom, I know we made mistakes. But we're still your family. We don't deserve this. Ah. There it is. I shook my head, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat. They still didn't get it. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were sorry they had lost their safety net. And I wasn't going to be their safety net ever again. I put the car in drive and pulled away. For years, they had told me I owed them. That family means everything. But this time? I was making sure they understood exactly how it felt to be abandoned. Days passed. Then weeks. I never responded. The text kept coming at first, pleas, guilt trips, even veiled threats. But when they realized I wasn't going to save them, the messages stopped. I heard through a distant relative that they lost the house. That my father's pride shattered when they had to move into a tiny apartment. That my mother still cried about how cruel I had been. And Amanda? She was gone. No calls, no letters, nothing. The golden child had disappeared the moment their money ran out. Funny how that works. I thought I'd feel guilty. That some part of me would ache to reach out. But I didn't. For the first time in my life, I felt free.